My name is Lily Carter. My father told me to bring this here if I ever had nowhere left to go. Chain hit the floor first. 200 Hell's Angels heard it. 200 men went completely silent. Because dragging behind an 18-year-old girl, a girl who looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days, was a rusted motorcycle chain attached to something no one in that room expected to see again. A leather vest, a dead man's vest, and every single rider who recognized that name stitched across the back felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart pounding, please subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment right now telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the night everything changed. The Black Canyon Tavern had seen a lot of things in its 40-something years of existence, sitting out there on the edge of the Arizona desert like a fist raised against the sky. Seen fistfights that started over a spilled drink and ended in a handshake. Seen men cry when a brother died on the road, and then watched those same men laugh and pour one out in his honor an hour later. It had seen every kind of human being that the American Southwest could produce. The hard ones, the broken ones, the ones who looked like they'd been carved from the same red rock and dust that surrounded the place. But on the night of April 14th, nobody inside that bar was prepared for what walked through the door. It was a Thursday. That mattered because Thursdays at Black Canyon weren't like other nights. Thursdays were when chapters gathered. Just the local Phoenix crew, but riders from Nevada, Tucson, from Flagstaff men who had driven hours, because this particular Thursday marked 30 years since the chapter's founding, 30 years since a group of men decided that loyalty meant something real, that brotherhood wasn't just a word you tattooed on your arm. There were somewhere around 220 men inside when she walked in. Most of them didn't notice the door open at first. They were loud. They were celebrating. Big Danny Cortez from the Tucson chapter was halfway through a story about a road trip that had gone sideways in New Mexico, and people were laughing so hard, some of them were wiping tears. The jukebox was playing something old and twangy. Bottles were clinking. The room smelled like engine grease and cigarette smoke, and the particular kind of American freedom that people who've never ridden a motorcycle probably can't understand. And then the chain scraped the floor, that sound. It wasn't loud. That was the strange part. In a room full of that much noise, a chain dragging across wooden floorboards shouldn't have stopped a single conversation. But it did. Maybe it was the tone of it. Metal on old wood has its own frequency, its own weight, something that the human ear recognizes before the brain has time to process it. Or maybe it was just one of those moments where the universe decides something important is about to happen and quiets everything down so nobody misses it. Danny Cortez stopped mid-sentence, men turned. One by one, then in waves, the conversations died. And in the silence that spread across that packed bar like a stone, dropped in still water, every single person saw her. 18 years old, blonde hair that needed a wash, hanging in thick pieces around a face that was young but not soft. There was something in her eyes that people noticed right away, not just exhaustion, though she was clearly exhausted, just fear, though any sane person would have been scared walking into a room like that. It was something older than her age, something that happens to people who have been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. She was wearing jeans that had seen better years, boots that were caked with desert dust, and a jacket that looked like it had been pulled from the back of someone's closet. Her hands, and several men near the front noticed this first, her hands were bleeding, not badly. Small cuts across her palms like she'd been gripping something rough for a very long time. She had been, because in her right hand she held a chain, motorcycle chain, gauge, rusted in places, the kind of thing that might have come off a bike that hadn't run in years. Dragged behind her on the floor, and at the end of that chain, like something she'd hauled across the entire state of Arizona on foot, was a leather vest. In a room full of people who understood exactly what a leather vest meant, what it represented, what a man had to earn, what it cost to lose one, the sight of that vest hit every person in that room at a completely different emotional frequency. The room was so quiet now that you could hear the jukebox playing softly in the corner. Nobody moved. The girl stood in the doorway and looked at the crowd. 220 men, most of them big, most of them tattooed, most of them with faces that could intimidate a police detective. She looked at them the way someone looks at a door they've been working up the courage to knock on for years. Then she took one step forward. The chain dragged. From the back of the room, from the private corner table where the senior men always sat, a chair scraped back. Daniel Raven Whitmore stood up. Raven was 52 years old and had been riding since before this girl was born. He was not a particularly large man, medium height, lean through the shoulders with gray threading through his dark beard and a face that carried 30 years of road miles in every line. He didn't need to be large. In the 30 years he'd been part of this club, he had never raised his voice in a meeting, not once, because he never needed to. When Raven stood up, people paid attention. He walked through the crowd, and men moved out of his way without being asked, the way water moves around a stone. He walked slowly, his eyes locked on the girl, his face absolutely unreadable. Stopped about 6 feet in front of her. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. And for a long moment, nobody in that bar breathed. "You got a reason for walking in here like this?" Raven's voice was quiet. It was always quiet. The girl, she didn't flinch. That was the thing people would talk about later, for months, in bars and garages across 2 states. This 18-year-old girl standing in front of Raven Whitmore with 200 bikers at her back, and she didn't flinch. "Yes, sir," she said. "My name is Lily Carter, and I think you knew my father." Raven went very still. The kind of still that isn't peace. The kind of still that is a man's body catching up with something his mind already understood. "Carter," he said. Not a question. A word that landed like something heavy being set down. From somewhere in the room, someone drew a sharp breath. "Show him the vest, sweetheart." That came from Big Danny, who had pushed his way to the front and was standing there with an expression that had gone from celebration to something much more complicated. "Hold it up." Lily crouched down. She gathered the chain in her bleeding hands and she lifted the vest from the floor. She held it up. And when Raven saw the name stitched across the back, the color left his face. Not because he was weak. Raven was not a weak man. There are things in a man's life that live in a place past strength and weakness, in a place where all that matters is what's true. And what was stitched across the back of that worn leather vest in faded thread was as true and as painful as anything Raven had encountered in 30 years. Michael Carter. The room erupted, not in noise, in the opposite of noise, in that thick, pressurized silence that happens when 200 people all feel the same thing at the same moment, and none of them have words for it. Because Michael Carter had been gone for 10 years. Because Michael Carter was not supposed to exist in anyone's present tense anymore. He was memory. He was past. He was the brother whose name you raised a glass to on nights like this, and then you looked away because looking too long at what you'd lost made it too real. Now, here was his daughter, standing in front of them, carrying his vest, bleeding from her hands. Raven looked at Lily for a long moment. Then he reached out, very slowly, and took the vest from her. He held it in both hands. He turned it over. He looked at it the way you look at something that's been lost and found with relief and grief arriving at the same time, each one making the other worse. "How long have you been traveling?" he asked. 3 days, Lily said. "Walked the last part. My car ran out of gas about 11 miles back." 11 miles, someone in the crowd said it softly, not unkindly. "Just the weight of it." Raven looked at her hands. "Come with me," he said. He put his hand on her shoulder gently. The way a man handles something fragile that is refusing to act fragile, and he walked her through the crowd. Men stepped back. Some of them nodded at her. Few of them, the older ones, who had known Michael Carter personally, watched her walk past with expressions that were part disbelief and part something that resembled reverence. They went through the door at the back of the bar to the private room where the serious conversations happened. Raven closed the door behind them. For a moment, it was just the two of them, the chain on the table between them, the vest laid flat, and the sound of the celebration slowly starting up again outside, quieter now, more subdued, the way a party sounds when something real has interrupted it. "Sit down, Lily." She sat. She didn't slump. She sat straight with the deliberate posture of someone who has decided that they will not fall apart no matter how close to the edge they are. Raven sat across from her. He folded his hands on the table. "When did he die?" he asked, because he needed to hear it from her. He knew the date. He'd attended the funeral, stood at the graveside, felt the weight of it in his chest for a year afterward. But he needed to hear her say it. 10 years ago, she said. April 2nd, I was where were you? At school. They came and got me out of class. She paused. The principal had this look on his face. I knew before he said anything. Raven was quiet. Your mother? She passed 4 years ago. Lily kept her voice even. She'd clearly had this conversation in her head many times. Cancer. I was 14. Who raised you after that? My aunt for a while. Then cousins. Then nobody. She said it without self-pity, which made it worse somehow. I'm 18 now. Legally, I don't need anyone to raise me. Raven looked at her hands again. Those cuts need cleaning. I know. She didn't move to do anything about it. I need to tell you something first. All right. She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and pulled out an envelope. Old. The kind of envelope that had been handled many times, opened and closed and opened again over years. Paper had gone soft with use. She placed it on the table between them. My father left this. I found it. When I turned 18, inside a lockbox he'd hidden inside the frame of my bedroom wall. He built me a hiding place inside the wall of my bedroom when I was little, told me it was a magic space where only the two of us knew about. Thought it was just a game. She looked at the envelope. Wasn't just a game. Raven didn't touch it. What's in it? Letter, Lily said. And a key to what? I don't know yet. The key doesn't have a label. She paused. But the letter does. Raven waited. Lily straightened. The letter says I memorized it. Read it about 1,000 times. It says, if my daughter ever comes to Black Canyon Tavern carrying this chain and this vest, it means she has found the truth and has nowhere else to go. Protect her the way you protected me. And listen to what she has found. Because there are people who don't want it found. The silence between them was different now. Heavier. Your father wrote that 10 years ago, Raven said slowly. 9.5. About 6 months before he died, she met his eyes. He knew something was coming for him. He prepared for it. He prepared for me. Raven leaned back. He wasn't a man who showed emotion easily, but his jaw was tight in a way that made clear what was happening underneath his expression. Lily, I have to ask you something and I need you to answer me straight. Okay. When you left to come here, did anyone follow you? The question landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Lily's expression shifted, just slightly. The composure cracked for the first time, just a hairline fracture across the surface. Don't know, she admitted. I don't think so, I was careful. She hesitated. They've been watching my father's old contacts. I know that because the first 2 people I tried to reach, people whose names were in my father's files, they both shut the door on me within 30 seconds. Both of them, before I even finished saying my name. Raven was quiet for a moment. Smart people, he said. Didn't sound like a compliment. Scared people, Lily corrected. He looked at her. Smart and scared, she said. Which means whoever scared them is still out there, still operating, still with enough power to make grown adults shut the door on the daughter of a dead man. She paused. That's what the letter is really about. My father didn't just leave me a goodbye. He left me a trail. He knew I'd come here. He knew I'd need help. And he knew that whatever he discovered hadn't ended when he died. Just went dormant, Raven said softly. Yes, Lily said. Now it's awake again. Because I woke it up, the door opened. Big Danny Cortez filled the frame. He looked at Raven, then at Lily, then at the vest and the envelope on the table. Face was reading everything the way experienced people read rooms. We got a situation, Danny said quietly. Raven looked at him. What kind? Truck parked across the road about 10 minutes ago. Engine still running, nobody got out. He paused. It wasn't there when she came in. The 3 of them looked at each other. And Lily Carter, 18 years old, bleeding hands, hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Lily Carter didn't panic. She didn't gasp. She didn't reach for Raven's arm. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. Then we don't have as much time as I thought, she said. And there's something else you need to hear before we talk about anything else. She set the recorder on the table next to the envelope. My father recorded this, she said, 6 days before he died. Raven and Danny exchanged a look. How long is it? Raven asked. 47 minutes, Lily said. Most of it is details about the financial scheme, the names, the companies, the documents. But there's a part at the end. She paused, and for the first time, The composure wavered in a way that was about more than exhaustion or fear. Wavered in the way that something wavers when you're about to say the worst thing. There's a part at the end where he names the person who betrayed him. Danny stepped fully into the room and closed the door. The noise of the bar outside was muffled now, distant, like another world. He names a specific person? Raven asked. Yes, someone we knew. It wasn't a question. Raven's voice had gone completely flat in the way that voices go flat when they're bracing. Lily looked at him steadily. Someone you trusted, she said. Raven put both hands flat on the table. He looked at the recorder. He looked at the vest. He looked at this girl, Michael's girl, who had walked 11 miles through the Arizona desert and into a room full of 200 strangers because her father, a decade dead, had trusted that they would not fail her. Thought about Michael Carter, about the man who could fix any engine by sound alone, about the man who showed up every time, no questions, no hesitation, about the man whose funeral Raven had stood at with a hole in his chest that hadn't entirely healed in 10 years. Thought about the word betrayal, what it weighed, what it cost. He thought about the truck sitting across the road with its engine running. Hanny thought about a little girl, 8 years old, being pulled out of class by a principal with a terrible expression on his face. Pressed play. The recording started with a burst of static, then a voice slightly muffled, clearly recorded in a hurry, but recognizable to every cell in Raven's body as the voice of Michael Carter filled the small room. If you're hearing this, then I didn't make it. And if my daughter brought this to you, then she's braver than I ever gave her credit for. A pause. I'm going to tell you everything. All of it. From the beginning, because someone needs to know the truth, and I need it to be people I trust. Another pause, shorter. Just hope I'm right about who I still trust. Big Danny Cortez, a man who had faced down situations that would have unmade most people, put one hand on the doorframe and stood very still. Raven didn't move. Lily watched both of them with the quiet attention of someone who had already listened to this recording many times and had watched herself react to every word and had carefully, deliberately put that reaction somewhere far down inside where it couldn't stop her from doing what she'd come here to do. Michael Carter's voice continued. In the Black Canyon Tavern, 30 years to the day since the chapter's founding, 200 men outside the door slowly began to understand that the celebration had just become something else entirely. Outside, across the road, the truck sat in the dark with its engine running. Inside, a dead man's voice told the truth he'd never gotten to say while he was alive. The chain lay on the table between them, heavy, real, unmistakable. The weight of 10 years, waiting to be carried by the only person willing to pick it up. The daughter her father always believed would come. Michael Carter's voice on that recording didn't sound like a ghost. That was the first thing Raven noticed. It sounded like a man who was tired, a man who had been awake too long, who had been carrying something too heavy, who had finally sat down somewhere quiet and decided that the truth was worth more than his fear of what telling it might cost him. I need to start with the money, Michael's voice said through the recorder, because that's where all of this started. Not with a gun, not with a threat. With money, with paper, with money, with numbers that most people don't understand and don't want to understand, and that's exactly how they counted on it working. Raven hadn't moved. He was sitting with both forearms on the table, his eyes on the recorder, his face doing absolutely nothing. Danny Cortez had pulled a chair over without being asked and was sitting near the door, positioned the way a man positions himself when he's listening hard, but also keeping one ear toward whatever might be coming from outside. Lily sat across from Raven. She wasn't listening to the recording. She was watching Raven's face because she'd already heard every word. She knew every pause, every catch in her father's breath, every moment where the voice on the recorder went quiet for a second, and you could almost feel a man deciding how honest to be. She had studied this recording the way some people study scripture, not for comfort, but for truth and for the specific kind of courage that comes from understanding exactly how hard things really are. She was watching Raven's face because she needed to know when they got to the part that would hurt him. There's a company, Michael's voice continued. Or there was a company. It goes by 3 different names depending on what state you're in and who you're talking to. Arizona, it was registered as Meridian Asset Holdings, Nevada, Desert Capital Group. In New Mexico, they used a law firm as a front, Stanton and Reeves. But it's all the same people. Same money, same plan. Danny looked at Raven. Raven gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He didn't recognize the names, not yet. The plan, Michael said, is simple. I mean that. It is genuinely simple, and that's what makes it so effective. You find a small business owner who's struggling. Not failing struggling. There's a difference. Failing means it's over. Struggling means there's still something worth taking. If you approach them with what looks like a lifeline, a loan, short-term, favorable rate, easy terms. The paperwork is complicated, it's always complicated, but you have a lawyer with you who explains it in plain language, and the plain language sounds fine. So you sign. Raven's jaw tightened. Then, Michael said, the voice dropped slightly, the terms change. Not all at once, incrementally. A new clause here. Fee adjustment there. The interest recalculates under a condition you didn't notice in the paperwork because it was buried in section 14, subsection C, paragraph 8. Suddenly, the loan that was supposed to save your business is devouring it. You go back to the lawyer, and the lawyer has a different face now, not the friendly one, the real one. And the real one tells you that you signed, and what you signed says they can call the full balance due in 30 days if you miss a single payment, and you've already missed one because the recalculation moved your payment date and nobody told you. 30 days, Danny said quietly. He wasn't asking. He was understanding. 30 days to produce money you don't have. Michael's voice said, almost as if answering, you can't. Business transfers. Not to a bank, not into receivership. To a holding company, that is, if you trace it through 3 layers of ownership, controlled by the same people who gave you the loan in the first place. Raven said they were buying businesses with businesses' own debt. Yes, Lily said. He looked at her. How many? Keep listening. Michael Carter's voice counted. Auto repair shops. Family diner outside Tucson that had been running for 31 years. A hardware store in Flagstaff. A motorcycle parts distributor in the Phoenix area. And that one made both Raven and Danny go still because they knew that distributor, had bought from that distributor, had known the family that owned it. 3 landscaping companies, 2 small construction outfits, woman who had built a cleaning business from nothing over 12 years. Gone. All of them gone. The same way, through the same mechanism, all of them afraid to go public because the same lawyers who took their businesses were very good at explaining quietly and clearly exactly what would happen if they did. How many total? Raven asked Lily, pausing the recording with a gesture. Arizona alone? 37 businesses that he documented, Lily said. He believed the actual number was closer to 60. Some of them he couldn't prove. Some of them he found out about too late. Too late meaning after those people had already been convinced that nobody would help them. This was just how things went. That they'd made a mistake and now they had to live with it. She paused. That's the other part of it. It wasn't just the financial mechanics. They were also in the business of making people feel ashamed, like it was their fault, so they wouldn't talk. Danny said something under his breath that wasn't fit for print. Raven pressed play. I found out about this because of Tommy Reyes, Michael said, and both older men recognized that name immediately. A motorcycle mechanic who had run his own shop out in Mesa and had lost it under circumstances that nobody at the time understood. Tommy came to me because we'd known each other 15 years, and he trusted me, and he didn't know who else to trust. He showed me his paperwork, and I spent 3 weeks going through it, and when I understood what I was reading, I felt sick, because I realized this wasn't just Tommy. This was bigger. This was organized. And it had been going on for a long time without anyone connecting the dots because all the victims were spread out. All of them were dealing with their situations individually. None of them knew about each other. So my father connected them, Lily said quietly, not to the room, almost to herself. He found 11 of them in the first month, she continued, looking at Raven. Drove out to each one personally, sat at their kitchen tables, listened to them, cross-referenced their documents. Built a file, a real file, not just notes, actual evidence, paper trails, contracts, correspondence he'd obtained, bank records through a contact he had at a title company. She paused. He was about 6 weeks from having enough to go to federal authorities when he died. The recording was still playing softly. Michael's voice was describing the document structure now, the specific language in the contracts that served as the mechanism, and Raven was half listening and half looking at Lily with an expression that was struggling to contain something. Died on April 2nd, Raven said. Yes. The accident report said his brakes failed. Investigation found a mechanical defect, Lily said. Wear and tear consistent with the vehicle's age. An unfortunate accident. Case closed in 11 days. She met his eyes. My father maintained his own vehicles. He maintained them the way you maintained yours, obsessively. He could rebuild a brake system in his sleep. His brakes did not fail from wear and tear. Raven looked at Danny. Danny's jaw was set in stone. Lily, Raven said carefully, who knew what your father had found before he died? Who knew he was building this file? She had been waiting for this question since she walked through the door. That's what the recording tells you, she said. At the end, tell me now. I need you to hear his voice say it, she said quietly, because when you hear it, you're going to want to argue with me. You can't argue with his voice. Raven stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, how much more recording is there before we get to that part? About 30 minutes, he nodded. He looked at Danny. Something passed between them, a communication that didn't need words. The kind of exchange that only happens between people who have known each other long enough that they share a language made of looks and silences. Go check on that truck, Raven said. Danny stood. Quietly, very. Danny left without another sound, closing the door behind him. Raven turned back to the recorder. He turned back to Lily. While we listened, he said, I want you to tell me about the last 3 days. Everything. Where you started, who you talked to, how you got here. Leave nothing out. Lily took a breath. She folded her bleeding hands together on the table. Turned 18 on April 1st, she said. The day before the anniversary of his death. Don't know if he planned that or if it was just the way things fell. The lockbox was hidden exactly where he said it would be in the note he left with my grandmother's lawyer. I didn't even know there was a note with the lawyer until I turned 18 that was set up in advance too. My father was meticulous about this. He planned every piece of it. She paused. The lockbox had the vest, the chain, the recorder, the key, and the letter. And you opened it and read the letter. I opened it and read the letter and sat on the floor of my bedroom for about 2 hours not moving. She said it simply. Then I got up, packed a bag, and started making calls to the names in his files. First to 2 people who were friends of his people I remembered from when I was little, people I thought might still be reachable. The first one, a man named Gerald Swick, who used to come to our house. For 4th of July, I called him, and he picked up, and I said my name. I said I was Michael Carter's daughter. He said, wrong number, and hung up before I finished my second sentence. She paused. The second one was a woman named Patricia Munoz. She'd been my mother's friend as well as my father's. Drove to her house. She opened the door, saw my face, recognized me, and immediately said she couldn't help me and please don't come back. She said it with her hands shaking. She was terrified. Of what specifically, she didn't say. Before she closed the door, she looked past me, over my shoulder, not at anything on the street, just reflexively, the way people look when they're worried about being seen talking to someone. And I thought, that's not the look of someone who's just scared of getting involved. That's someone who's been specifically warned. Raven's eyes sharpened. Warned meaning someone had already contacted her. Before you. That's what I think, Lily said. Which means they knew I'd turned 18. Which means they were watching for me. The weight of that sentence settled over the room. Sighed, muffled through the walls, they could hear the bar. The sound of men talking, occasionally laughing, the low, steady murmur of a celebration that had become something quieter and more complicated. Men who didn't yet know the full shape of what was happening in this back room, but who understood that something was happening. Did you get here? Raven asked, after Munoz. Drove south for a while, then cut west. I kept changing direction because I wasn't sure if I was being followed, and I'd read enough of my father's files to know that panicking was exactly what they'd want. Stopped at a motel in Casa Grande, paid cash. Stayed one night, didn't sleep much. Kept listening to the recording. She glanced at the recorder on the table. I've listened to it 14 times. I know every word. Why did you wait before coming here? Why not come directly? Because I needed to understand what I was bringing you, she said immediately. Couldn't walk through that door and just say my father's name and ask for help. I had to know what the help was for. I had to understand it well enough to explain it. I spent 2 years building this case. I wasn't going to carry it this far and then hand it over half understood. Raven looked at her for a long moment without speaking. He had a look on his face that Lily couldn't quite read. It wasn't pity. It wasn't the particular expression that men sometimes wore when they were surprised by a young woman being capable of that condescending half-admiration that she'd encountered before and hated. It was something more like recognition. The way you look at someone when you realize they are exactly who they appear to be, and that person is more than you expected. Your car ran out of gas, he said, 11 miles back, and stretching the tank, and I misjudged. And you walked 11 miles through the desert, carrying a chain and a vest. I wasn't leaving them in the car. He nodded slowly. Okay. He looked at the recorder. Let's finish it. They listened. Michael Carter's voice walked them through the documentation, the specific contracts, the names of the holding companies, the way the financial structures had been layered to obscure ownership, the paper trail he'd assembled, and where he'd hidden copies of it. He described 3 different locations where he had placed physical copies of the evidence. One of those locations, a storage unit in Mesa, Lily had already checked and cleaned out. Whoever had gotten there first had been thorough. He gave him 3 locations. Lily said quietly when that section ended. 2 were gone, the third. She stopped. Raven looked at her. The third is what the key opens, she said. She placed the key on the table next to the recorder. It was small, the kind of key that opens a lockbox or a safe deposit box, with a number stamped on it, 447. Know which bank, she said, or if it's even a bank. He doesn't say it on the recording. I think he didn't say it on purpose, in case the recording fell into the wrong hands. It's the one piece he left out. The one thing you have to know without him telling you. Raven picked up the key. He turned it over. 447, he said. He looked at it for a moment. Then something shifted in his face. Not a dramatic change. The kind of change that happens inside a door opening. There's a credit union, he said slowly, out in Chandler. Michael used them for his business accounts. I know because I recommended them to him. My ex-wife's brother managed the commercial accounts there. He looked at Lily. 447. Lily leaned forward. You think? I think Michael was smart enough to put the most important copy somewhere connected to someone he trusted. He set the key back down. We need to get out to Chandler tonight? If that truck across the road is what I think it is, yes, tonight. And that was the moment the recording reached the end. They both heard it coming, the shift in Michael's voice, the pause that was longer than the others, the particular kind of exhale that a man makes when he's about to cross a line he can't come back from. I need to talk about who knew, Michael said. Who I told. Because I made a mistake. I trusted someone I shouldn't have trusted. And I know that the reason things moved as fast as they did, the reason I'm sitting here making this recording instead of standing in front of a federal prosecutor right now, is because someone told them I was coming. Raven's hands flattened on the table. I only told 2 people the full scope of what I had found. The first was my attorney, David Park, and I would stake my life on David Park's integrity. I know his family. I know his character, know his past. If it had been David, they would have moved differently. They would have moved through legal channels, created obstacles, buried it in procedure. That's not what happened. A pause. The second person I told, Michael said, was someone I considered family. Someone I brought into this because I thought he could help. Someone who had connections I didn't have and who I believed, genuinely and completely believed, wanted the same things I wanted. Justice, accountability. For people who couldn't fight for themselves. Raven's breathing had changed. Almost imperceptibly, but Lily noticed. His name is Victor Hayes. The name hit the room like a physical impact. Raven's chair scraped back hard. He stood, turned away from the table, one hand going to the back of his neck. He stood there with his back to Lily and the recorder. The silence that came from him was the kind of silence that is not quiet at all. That's not possible, he said. His voice was absolutely controlled, which made it worse. Victor Hayes rode with this club for 9 years, Raven said, still with his back turned. He was a brother. I vouched for him personally. He turned around. Vouched for him with my name, with my reputation. Brought him in. I know, Lily said. Michael knew that. Yes, and he still... Raven stopped. He said you weren't responsible, Lily said quickly. He said it specifically. I can play it again. I can play you exactly what he says. He says, Raven is not to blame for Victor. Nobody could have seen what Victor was. Victor spent years building the right appearance. That's what he was paid to do. Raven stood still. He was paid, Raven said slowly, from the beginning. Before he ever joined the club, he was already working for them. They placed him. She paused. He was never a brother. He was an asset. They needed eyes inside the community because a lot of the businesses that they were targeting, the owners, had connections to people like you, people who might have helped. Victor's job was to be the early warning system, to make sure the right people never got the right information in time. The door opened. Danny Cortez stepped back into the room. Face had changed from when he left. It had the taut, compressed look of someone who had just confirmed something they were hoping wasn't true. Truck's gone, he said. But I found something. Down the road, behind the mesquite, someone had a camera. Wireless setup. Cheap but effective. Already pulled the card. He set a small SD card on the table. Everyone looked at it. They were watching the entrance, Danny said. Which means they already knew she was here. Which means, Raven said. Danny blinked. What? Victor Hayes. That's who ran them. That's who's been running them. Raven picked up the key from the table and held it in his fist. Now they know she's here. They know we're talking. Which means we've got maybe a few hours before they try to find another way to get to that evidence before we do. Danny looked at Lily. Something shifted in his expression, not pity, but a kind of fierce, focused protectiveness that was distinctly the product of a man who took seriously the idea that some people deserved defending. She okay? He asked Raven, as if Lily wasn't in the room. Fine, Lily said clearly. Danny looked at her directly. Can you ride? She met his eyes. I can learn fast. For the first time since she'd walked through the door of the Black Canyon Tavern, something very small crossed Danny Cortez's face that might have been the beginning of a smile. Michael Carter's daughter, he said softly, mostly to himself. Raven set the key down. He looked at the vest. He looked at the recorder. He looked at the envelope with his old friend's letter inside it. Thought about Victor Hayes, about 9 years of shared meals and road miles, and conversations that had felt like truth and had been performance the entire time. He let himself feel it just for a moment, just enough to understand the full weight of it, and then he set it somewhere inside himself where it would wait until he had time to deal with it properly. Because grief and rage were real and they mattered, but right now they were luxuries he couldn't afford. He looked at Lily. Your father was right, he said. She waited. He said to protect you the way we protected him. He paused. We didn't do a good enough job protecting him, so we're going to do better by you. Lily Carter looked at Daniel Whitmore, this man she had met an hour ago, this stranger who had known her father in a world she had only heard about in stories, and she did something she had not done once since she walked through that door. Not when she lifted the vest, not when she heard her father's voice, not when she heard the name of the man who had betrayed him and by extension had taken her father from her. She let her face do what it had been holding back for 3 days and 200 miles and 11 miles on foot through the desert. Her eyes filled. She didn't cry, not fully. She pulled it back. But it was there, the evidence of everything it had cost her to get to this room, to this table, to this moment. Said, you would say something like that, she said. Voice was steady, just barely. Raven nodded once. Then let's make sure he was right about that too. Picked up the vest. He folded it carefully. He handed it back to Lily. She took it and held it against her chest, the way you hold something that is the only physical proof that a person existed and loved you. And she closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them. Okay, she said. What do we do first? Sighed through the walls, the sound of 220 men who didn't yet know that their night of celebration had just become something else entirely, something older and more serious. The sound of that shifted too, if the building itself was holding its breath. The recorder sat on the table between them, silent now. The chain lay coiled next to it. The key was in Raven's fist. The dead man's voice had said its last word, and the living ones were going to have to carry it the rest of the way. Raven didn't call a full meeting right away. That was the first thing that surprised Danny. 30 years of watching Raven lead, Danny had never seen the man sit on information that affected the whole club. Raven believed in transparency the way other men believed in religion, not naively, but with a conviction that came from seeing what happened when it broke down. Tonight he waited. He walked back into the bar, stood at the edge of the crowd for a moment, and picked out specific men. Not the loudest, not the biggest. The ones whose eyes were always moving, whose instincts had been sharpened by years of knowing when a situation was about to turn. Touched each one on the shoulder, leaned in, said something brief. Each of them nodded and moved without drawing attention. Then he came back to the private room and closed the door. Got eyes on the road and the parking area, he said. Pulled Marcus and 3 others inside the perimeter. Marcus Teller, Lily asked. Raven looked at her. You know that name? He's in my father's files, she said. As someone my father trusted. Something crossed Raven's face. Pride, maybe, in Michael Carter's thoroughness, mixed with the grief that came with remembering why that thoroughness had ultimately not been enough. He said, Marcus is good people. Good, Lily said, because I need to tell you something else. Danny, who had been leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, straightened slightly. And doing that every time, Lily prefaced something this small physical preparation, the unconscious bracing of a man who had already been surprised twice tonight and was now operating on the reasonable assumption that the surprises weren't finished. There's a name in my father's files, Lily said. Someone he documented as a peripheral contact of Meridian Asset Holdings, not one of the principals. A facilitator. Someone who moved money between accounts and provided legal cover for the transfers. She paused. His name is Ronald Keswick. He's a retired county judge. The room went quiet in a specific way. Retired, Danny said carefully. Retired from the bench. Not from influence. Lily unzipped the inside pocket of her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, not the original document, but a handwritten copy she'd made, she explained, because she hadn't wanted to carry originals. Still on 3 civic boards. He has relationships with 2 current county commissioners. He's the man who, according to my father's notes, signed off on at least 4 of the business transfers as a notary after his retirement from the bench. Raven took the paper and read it. His expression didn't change, but his stillness deepened in the way it did when information was hitting him harder than he was showing. Your father documented this, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a man trying to absorb the scope of what Michael had assembled. Father documented all of it, Lily said. That's what the key opens. The complete file. Everything he had. The copies that were pulled from the Mesa storage unit, those were his working copies. Duplicates. The original set with the authenticated documents and the complete chain of evidence, that's what's at the credit union. How do you know the originals are still there? Danny asked. They found the storage unit because nobody knew about the credit union except my father, and he never told Victor Hayes. He told me on the recording specifically, he says he gave Victor the location of the working files because he wanted Victor to feel included, to feel trusted, to not go looking for the real ones. She met Danny's eyes. Father suspected Victor before he died. He didn't have proof, but his instincts were telling him something was wrong. And he was careful enough to act on those instincts without confronting Victor directly. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he said he fed Victor the decoy, while protecting the real evidence somewhere Victor didn't know about. That's why they cleaned out the Mesa unit and thought they were done, Raven said slowly. He set the paper down. They thought they had everything. They spent 10 years thinking it was over. And then I turned 18, Lily said. The weight of that settled over all 3 of them. Sign outside had a decade of false security of men who thought they had successfully buried a truth. And then a girl who looked like she'd been built from the same hard material as her father walking through a door with a chain dragging behind her. We need to move on the credit union, Raven said. Tomorrow morning when it opens. There might be a problem with that, Lily said. Of course there was. Danny almost said it out loud. The account is in my father's name, she said, or was. Don't know the legal status of a safe deposit box held by a deceased person. Don't know if I have standing to access it as his heir. Without documentation I don't have on me. She paused. I have his death certificate. I have a copy of a will that lists me as sole heir. I have the key. I don't know if that's enough. I know someone at that credit union, Raven said. Ex-wife's brother, Lily said. You mentioned him. Carl Myers. He's been branch manager there for 11 years. Raven pulled out his phone. It's late, but he'll answer, Danny said. For you, he'll answer. Raven stepped away from the table and made the call. Lily and Danny sat in a silence that was not uncomfortable, but was full of the particular kind of awareness that comes when two people are both processing the same enormous amount of information and doing it in their own private ways. Danny looked at her hands. The cuts had dried, but they needed proper attention. There's a first aid kit in the back cabinet, he said. Top shelf. Lily looked at him. Your hands, he said. Should clean them. You'll have time while he's on the phone. She looked down at her palms as if she'd genuinely forgotten, which Danny thought she probably had. Pain had a way of becoming background noise when your mind was occupied with something bigger. She got up and found the kit without asking where the cabinet was. She just looked and found it, the way capable people did. Danny watched her clean the cuts methodically, without making a sound even when the antiseptic clearly stung. And he thought about Michael Carter, about the man he remembered, the quiet one, the mechanic's hands, the way he laughed at himself more easily than he laughed at other people. The daughter was different from the father in some ways. Michael had been warm on the surface and careful underneath. This girl led with the careful part and kept the warmth somewhere you had to look for. But it was there. Danny had seen it when Raven handed the vest back to her. In those 3 seconds when she closed her eyes, Raven came back to the table. Carl will meet us at the branch at 7 tomorrow morning, he said, before regular hours. He says as long as she has the will and the death certificate and the key, he can work with it. He paused. He also said something else. They looked at him. He said that account had a note on it, flagged several years ago. Someone tried to access it, came in with documentation, claiming to be a representative of the estate. Carl's predecessor turned them away because the documentation had an irregularity. A small one, probably not something most people would have caught. He sat down. Carl didn't know the context at the time. He does now. They tried to get to it, Danny said, and failed. And probably assumed the documentation was incomplete and the access would never happen without someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Raven looked at Lily. They didn't account for the fact that Michael had a daughter, or that his daughter would someday be old enough to come looking. They underestimated her, Danny said. Same words he'd said before, but with a different quality now. People do, Lily said simply. She closed the first aid kit and sat back down. It's useful. Before anyone could respond to that, the door opened and Marcus Teller came in. Marcus was in his mid-40s, lean and dark-eyed, with the careful quiet of someone who observed more than he spoke. He'd been riding with this chapter for 18 years. Also, before that part of his life, spent 6 years as an investigative accountant for a regional bank. It was a fact he didn't advertise, but which Raven had occasionally found extremely useful. Got something, Marcus said. He had his phone in his hand, and running the names Raven texted me. He glanced at Lily, Meridian Asset Holdings and the related entities. He pulled a chair up. They're not just local. The structure goes interstate Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and I'm seeing indicators of Colorado too. The holding company that sits at the top of the chain is incorporated offshore. Cayman Islands Registry, which means the beneficial ownership is deliberately obscured. Can you trace it? Raven asked. Not all the way. Not tonight. But I can get far enough to identify the domestic controllers. Marcus looked at his phone. There are 3 names attached to the Arizona operations as registered agents. 2 of them are lawyers almost certainly functioning as fronts. Their names are on the paperwork, but they're not the actual principals. The 3rd one, he paused. And pauses from Marcus meant something. Marcus did not pause for effect. The 3rd is a man named Gregory Aldous. He's listed as a private investment consultant based in Scottsdale. Clean record, good reputation in certain circles. Donated to civic causes. The kind of person you'd see at a charity gala and think successful, generous, community-minded. Marcus set his phone down. He's also the man who appears in the Chandler County property records as the buyer of 4 of the businesses your father documented, through the holding company directly, under his own name. After the transfers cleared, he was buying them out of the holding company, Lily said immediately. The holding company was the intermediate step. They defaulted the businesses into the holding company, And then Aldous purchased them for pennies from the holding company, and the holding company dissolved or went dormant. So the trail stops at the holding company, and Aldous looks like a legitimate buyer acquiring distressed assets. Marcus looked at her with the specific respect of one analytical mind recognizing another. Exactly, my father knew about Aldous, Lily said. He's in the recording. He mentions him twice. He couldn't prove the connection to the holding company at that point, but he suspected. The credit union box has what I think it has. There'll be documentation of that connection. Then we need that box before Aldous knows we're looking, Marcus said. He already knows she's here, Raven said, the camera on the road. Marcus absorbed this without visible alarm, which was one of the things Raven valued about him. Then we have a timeline problem. Tell me something I don't know. Here's something you don't know, Marcus said. Aldous has a lawyer who filed a records request with the county 3 months ago. Routine-looking request, the kind that gets processed without much attention. The request included a search for any open estate accounts or unclaimed assets related to a list of individuals. He looked at Lily. Michael Carter was on the list. The room temperature seemed to drop. They've been watching for her, Danny said. They've been watching for the estate, Marcus corrected. They might not have known about her specifically, but they knew that if the estates activated, if someone came looking for Michael Carter's affairs, it would mean someone had found something. And then someone walked into the Black Canyon Tavern tonight, Lily said quietly. The camera across the road, Raven finished. Marcus leaned forward. Raven, there's one more thing. He hesitated again, unusual for him. I ran Victor Hayes. Every person in the room went still in a different way. Lily, because she already knew the shape of what was coming. Raven, because hearing the name from Marcus made it real in a different way than hearing it from the recording. Danny, because he'd known Victor Hayes and ridden beside him and called him brother and was still processing what that meant now. Victor hasn't been in Arizona for 4 years, Marcus said. He relocated to Nevada Henderson outside Las Vegas. He's running a consulting business. Security consulting, officially, a pause. Primary client, according to business filings, is a Nevada-registered LLC called Sonoran Shield Partners. Let me guess, Danny said. Sonoran Shield Partners shares a registered agent with Desert Capital Group, Marcus said, which is one of the names in Michael Carter's file, which is a Nevada-registered entity connected to Meridian Asset Holdings. Victor Hayes had never left. He'd just changed his location and his business card. He was still working for the same people he'd been working for when he wrote with this club, when he sat at Michael Carter's kitchen table and heard things Michael shouldn't have told him, when he passed information that cost a man his breaks and his life and left an 8-year-old girl being pulled out of class with no idea what her face was about to be shown. Raven stood up. He walked to the far side of the room and stood with his back to everyone for about 15 seconds. Nobody spoke. When he turned around, his face was clear. Not calm clear. There's a difference. Calm is what happens when there's nothing to feel. Clear is what happens when a person decides that what they feel is not going to make the decisions for them. Here's what we're going to do, he said. He laid it out in 3 parts. The first was immediate. Lily stayed in the building tonight, not negotiable, and 4 men he trusted specifically would maintain watch through the night in rotating shifts. Her bag was still in her car 11 miles up the road, and someone would go get it without advertising why. She needed sleep, she needed food, and she needed her hands properly looked at, because dried cuts in desert air had a way of becoming something worse if you ignored them. The second part was the morning 7 a.m. at the credit union in Chandler. Small group, Raven, Marcus, Lily, and 1 other. They would move in 2 vehicles, different routes, and Marcus would drive ahead to verify there was no surveillance on the branch before they arrived. The third part was everything after. That part, Raven said, would depend on what was in the box. But he wanted people positioned. He wanted lawyers contacted, not club lawyers, he said, but federal-level attorneys who could receive evidence and knew what to do with it. He named 2 people. Marcus wrote them down. And Victor, Danny asked. Raven looked at him steadily. Victor, we'll find out we're moving when it's too late for him to do anything about it. Aldous? Aldous has never met anyone like her, Raven said. And he meant Lily, and the way he said it wasn't sentimental. It was tactical. It was a man assessing an asset with the same care he'd give to anything precious and irreplaceable. He thinks this is about money. He thinks everyone in this situation is motivated by money because that's the only motivation he understands. He paused. He doesn't understand what Michael Carter built. He doesn't understand what standing here tonight cost this girl. He doesn't understand what it means when this many men decide that something matters enough to stand behind. The room was quiet. Then Lily said, "There's one more thing I haven't told you." There it was again, Danny's involuntary physical bracing. "The woman who shut the door on me," Lily said, "Patricia Munoz. Before she closed it, she said something. I've been sitting on it because I wasn't sure what it meant, and I didn't want to bring it up until I understood the full picture better." She looked around the table. She said, "Tell whoever you're going to. Tell them to check the date." Just that. Tell them to check the date. Silence. "What date?" Marcus asked. "Didn't know when she said it," Lily said. "But I think I know now after what you just told me about the records requested." She looked at Marcus. "When was that request filed?" He checked his phone. "March 14th. My birthday is April 1st, she said. "Means someone filed that records request 3 weeks before I turned 18, before I had legal standing to access my father's estate." She let that land. "They weren't reacting to something I did. They were anticipating it. They knew my birthday. They knew my legal standing would activate on that date. They were already moving." "Inside information," Danny said. "From the very beginning," Lily said. "Which means it's not just Victor," Marcus said. He'd gone very still in his analytical way, the way he went still when pieces were arranging themselves into a pattern he could see. "Victor is in Nevada. He's not filing records requests in Arizona. Someone local filed that request. Someone with access to estate records and the legal sophistication to know that a minor heir becomes a legal adult at a specific date." He looked at Raven. "Someone like a retired judge." "Keswick," Raven said. He knew Michael's estate was still open. He would have known about the safe deposit box, maybe not the contents, but the existence. And he knew that on April 1st, Lily Carter would legally become the person who could access it. Marcus paused. It was preemptive. He filed that request to get there first. "He didn't count on me coming here," Lily said. "He didn't count on you, period," Danny said. "None of them did." Marcus looked at the key on the table. He looked at Lily. He looked at Raven. "We should move the timeline up," he said. 6 a.m. instead of 7. "Carl can manage it. I'll call him back." Raven nodded. He looked at Lily. "Can you manage 6 a.m. after 3 days of not sleeping?" "I managed 11 miles tonight," she said. 6 a.m. is fine." There was the thing in her face again, not toughness performed for the room, but the real kind, the kind that comes from understanding exactly what the stakes are and deciding that they matter more than your comfort, more than your fear, more than the very reasonable wish that someone else would handle it. She reached across the table and picked up the recorder. She turned it over in her hands. Her father's voice was in there, all 47 minutes of it. She had listened to it 14 times, and she knew she would listen again tonight, not because she needed the information, but because it was the closest thing she had to being in the same room with him, to hearing him breathe, to knowing that once, 10 years ago, he had sat somewhere and thought about her, specifically not just about the evidence, not just about justice, but about her, about what she might need, about who might help her, about the daughter he was going to have to protect from the other side of death. He was scared when he made this, she said, not to anyone in particular. You can hear it if you know what to listen for. It's not in his voice is steady the whole time. It's in the pauses, the way he breathes before he says something hard. She looked at Raven. "Did you know he was scared of anything?" Raven considered the question honestly. "He didn't show fear easily." "No," she said, "he didn't." She set the recorder down. "But he made this for me. He thought through every detail. He set up the lockbox. He arranged the letter with the lawyer. He built the decoy files to protect the real ones. He did all of that for me. The whole time he was scared." She paused. "I've been angry at him for a long time for dying, for leaving me. I know that's not fair, but it's true." A breath. "Listening to this, listening to him be scared, and do all of it anyway, I stopped being angry." Nobody in the room said anything, because there are moments when the right response is silence, when a person says something true and important, and the correct answer is to let it exist in the air without covering it with words. Raven looked at this girl who had walked 11 miles through the desert with a chain and a dead man's vest, who had listened to her father's voice 14 times in a motel room in Casa Grande, who had shown up bleeding and exhausted and absolutely unbroken, and he thought about the promise on that recording. Protect her the way you protected me. He had not protected Michael well enough. He was not going to make that mistake twice. Get some sleep, he said. We move at 6 outside. The bar had gone quiet. The celebration was over. Word had spread the way it always spread in places like this, not through announcement, but through tone, through the particular way men held themselves when something serious was happening, through the instinctive communal shift from festivity to readiness that was one of the things people who dismissed groups like this never understood about them. 220 men who had come to celebrate 30 years were now waiting. They didn't know exactly what they were waiting for, but they knew it mattered. And in the private room at the back of the Black Canyon Tavern, a key sat on a table next to a chain, next to a dead man's voice in a recorder. An 18-year-old girl who had been building toward this moment for her entire life finally closed her eyes. Not in defeat, in preparation. Because tomorrow the box would open, and everything her father had died protecting would finally come into the light. The men who had spent 10 years believing they had won were about to discover what it felt like when a dead man's daughter decided they were wrong. She slept 3 hours. Not because 3 hours was enough, because her body took what it could get, and her mind was already moving before the alarm on Marcus's phone went off at 5:15. She heard it through the wall of the small back room where they'd set up a cot, and she was sitting up before the second buzz, the vest folded on the chair beside her, the recorder in her jacket pocket, the key on the cord around her neck where she'd put it before lying down, because she wasn't taking any chances with something that small and that irreplaceable. She came out of the room and found Raven already at the table with coffee, looking like a man who hadn't slept at all and wasn't bothered by it. Marcus was at the other end of the table with his laptop open. Danny was near the door, talking quietly on his phone. 2 other men she hadn't been introduced to by name were positioned near the bar entrance. Nobody said good morning in a bright way. This was not a bright morning situation. They acknowledged each other the way people acknowledge each other when there's work to do, and everyone understands that. Marcus looked up from his laptop. Carl confirmed. Branch opens for us at 6. He's already there. He paused. Also confirmed no overnight activity at the branch that he can see on the exterior cameras. Nobody went near it. They don't know about it, Lily said. She poured herself coffee from the pot on the counter. Her hands were stiff but functional. Victor didn't know. Aldous doesn't know. Keswick knows there's an account, but not which branch. That's what we're counting on, Raven said. Carl, Danny said, lowering his phone. Is he solid? 11 years, Raven said. And he was the one who caught the irregular access attempt before. Didn't have to flag that most branch managers process the paperwork and move on. He flagged it because something felt wrong. He looked at Lily. He's solid. She nodded and drank her coffee. It was strong and slightly burnt, and it was exactly what she needed. By 5:40, they were moving. 2 vehicles, different routes as planned. Marcus running point in a truck with a rider named Cole, who was 30 years old, and had the particular kind of alert stillness that suggested military background. Raven drove the second vehicle with Lily and Danny. They left separately, 10 minutes apart, and Raven took a route that added 15 minutes to the trip by design, doubling back twice through residential streets, watching mirrors, taking the kind of precautions that a decade ago would have felt paranoid and tonight felt entirely reasonable. Nobody followed them. The credit union branch in Chandler was a single-story building set back from a commercial street. Carl Myers was waiting outside the employee entrance when they arrived. He was 61 years old, Lily's height, with reading glasses on a cord around his neck and the expression of a man who was doing something he knew was right and was nervous about it anyway, which was the best kind of nervous to see in a person. He shook Raven's hand. He looked at Lily. "You look like your father," he said. It came out before he could decide whether to say it, the way true things sometimes do. Lily looked at him. "A lot of people have told me that this week. It's a compliment," he said quietly. "Come in." Inside, Carl walked them through the process with careful efficiency. Lily produced the death certificate, the will, and the key. Carl examined everything with the reading glasses on, cross-referencing against the account records on his screen. The account had been established by Michael Carter 22 years earlier. The box was box number 447. The authorized access note on the account listed Michael Carter as primary, and in handwriting that was different from the account's original documentation, added later, Carl confirmed, about 11 years ago, a year before Michael died, Lily M. Carter heir upon reaching legal majority. He had added her name. He had made sure it was there. He had thought of everything. Lily stood at the counter, reading the authorization note in her father's handwriting, and she pressed her lips together hard and breathed through her nose and didn't say anything for a moment. Raven stood beside her and didn't say anything either. He just stood there, close enough that she could feel the steadiness of him. And sometimes that's what a person needs more than words. Everything's in order, Carl said. He looked at Lily over his glasses. Are you ready? Yes, she said. The vault room was small and functional. Carl used his key and Lily used hers simultaneously in the double lock mechanism, and the metal drawer slid out with the particular sound of something that has been sealed for a long time finally being opened. It was heavier than she expected. She carried it to the viewing table and set it down. The four of them, Raven, Marcus, Danny, Lily, stood around it. She opened the lid. Inside were two sealed manila envelopes thick with documents, USB drive, and a small plastic case. 3 notebooks, the composition kind, filled margin to margin with her father's handwriting. Separate smaller envelope with her name, written on the front in the same handwriting she'd seen on the authorization note. Beneath all of it, carefully wrapped in cloth, a second recorder older than the one she'd found in the lockbox, a different model. Nobody touched anything for a moment. Then Marcus said very quietly, "This is everything." "Yes," Lily said. She reached for the small envelope with her name on it first, because she had to, because it was her name in her father's handwriting, and there was no universe in which she could stand in that room and leave it untouched. She opened it. 1 page, handwritten, dated 11 months before he died, which meant he'd made this deposit, set all of this up, written this letter, and then lived with it for almost a year, knowing, preparing, going about his days with all of this sitting here. She read it to herself. Her face was absolutely still. Then she folded it and put it in her inside pocket against her chest next to the recorder. She would share what was relevant. This part was hers. "The envelopes," Marcus said gently, not pushing offering. She nodded and stepped back and let Marcus take the lead on the documents because that was his expertise and she trusted that. He opened the first envelope with careful hands and began going through the contents with the systematic attention of a man who had spent years doing exactly this kind of work. He narrated as he went quietly, laying documents out on the table in sequence. The authenticated contracts. 31 of them, more than Lily had known about from the recording. 31 small business owners whose paperwork showed the exact mechanism Michael had described on the recording, laid out in sequence, showing the original loan documents, the midstream amendments, the payment recalculation notices, the acceleration clauses, and the final transfer documents, the banking records. Obtained, Marcus noted, through what Michael had described in the recording, a contact at a title company named Deb Holloway, who had access to certain transaction records through her legitimate business function. The records showed the money moving from the loan origination through the holding company to accounts tied through 2 additional steps to Sonoran Shield Partners. Victor Hayes. The correspondence. 3 emails between Aldous and a lawyer named Stanton, printed, authenticated with a notary stamp, which meant Michael had a source inside the legal network, someone who had given him copies of protected communications. That source's name wasn't in the documents. Michael had protected them. The content of the emails was unambiguous. Aldous directing Stanton on specific targets, specific timelines, specific mechanisms for the transfers. Then Marcus picked up the 3rd document in the 2nd envelope and went still. Not the analytical still, the other kind, he said. Something in his voice made everyone focus on him immediately. Turned the document so Raven could read it. It was a single page. Memorandum of Understanding, signed by 3 parties. Gregory Aldous, Ronald Keswick, and a 3rd name. Raven read the 3rd name. He read it again. He set the document down on the table and pressed both palms flat on the surface and stared at it. "Who is it?" Danny asked. "James Whitfield," Raven said. The state senator James Whitfield. Yes. Raven's voice had gone flat in that particular way. He was a county commissioner when this started. Michael knew about Aldous and Keswick. He didn't know about Whitfield. Lily stepped forward and looked at the document. She read the names. She read the date 14 years ago, which meant this scheme had been running 6 years before her father ever encountered it. Whitfield is still in office, Marcus said. He's on the Commerce Committee, Danny said slowly. Was putting pieces together in real time, his face showing the work, which means he has oversight authority over exactly the kind of business regulatory questions that would have come up if anyone had reported these transfers officially. He was the insurance policy, Lily said. They all looked at her. Aldous runs the scheme. Keswick provides legal cover for the transfers. Whitfield sits on the committee that would handle any regulatory complaint and make sure it goes nowhere. She looked at the document. Father found 2 of the 3 legs of the structure. He was missing the most important one, the one that made the whole thing untouchable through official channels. That's why he was killed, Raven said. Not a guess, a realization arriving in real time. He was getting close to something they couldn't afford to have exposed. Not the businesses, those were manageable. Businesses fail, people move on. But a sitting state official connected to a fraudulent scheme, that's federal. That's career-ending. That's prosecutable at a level that no amount of legal maneuvering can fully stop. He got too close, Marcus said. And Victor told them how close, Lily said. The room held all of it. Then Marcus picked up the USB drive. I need a laptop. Carl, who had been standing near the door of the viewing room, with the quiet discretion of a man who understood that what was happening in front of him was above his pay grade, but was happening for a good reason, reached into his bag and produced one without being asked. Marcus plugged in the drive. It contained files, organized with the same meticulous care as everything else Michael Carter had assembled, labeled, dated, cross-referenced. Marcus scanned through them with increasing speed and then stopped on one. Video, he said. He turned the laptop so everyone could see. The footage was from a security camera, the fixed angle and timestamp format of a business's interior system. The business was identifiable from the signage in the frame, a title company. The date was 8 years before Michael died. In the frame, 2 men sat across a table from a third man who was clearly a business owner, nervous, reading documents, signing. One of the 2 men on the business side was identifiable after a moment as a younger Gregory Aldous. The other was Ronald Keswick. Keswick, who at the date of this footage was still an active judge. Active judge participating personally in a meeting designed to defraud a small business owner. On camera. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Danny said, "Who had this camera? Who got Michael this footage?" "Deb Holloway," Lily said slowly. She was thinking through the recording again, cross-referencing. She wasn't just providing banking records. She had a broader access than my father described publicly. She might have, if the title company where she worked handled the transfers on some of these deals. She had interior camera access, Marcus said, because she worked there. She gave Michael copies. "Where is she now?" Raven asked. Marcus typed for 30 seconds. He stopped. His expression changed in a way that made Lily's stomach drop before he said anything. "She died," he said, 7 years ago. Car accident." He looked up. "Outside Tucson, brake failure." The silence that followed was different from all the other silences of the previous 12 hours. It was heavier because it meant something they hadn't fully confronted yet, that the people who had built this scheme and protected it had done so with a willingness to kill. That extended beyond Michael Carter. That he wasn't the only one. "How many?" Lily said. Voice was very quiet. "I don't know yet," Marcus said. "Find out," she said. It wasn't a request. He was already typing. Raven looked at Lily. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you are recalculating everything you thought you understood about the situation there and recalculating upward towards something more dangerous and more urgent than you'd initially assessed. "The lawyers I named last night," he said. "We need to make that call today, this morning." "How quickly can they move?" she asked. "Quickly enough," he said. "The question is evidence preservation. Once we contact them, everything in this box needs to be in secure hands within hours." "Not copies, originals, Carl," Raven said. Carl straightened. He'd been holding himself very still, professionally neutral, a man who was deeply aware that he was standing inside something large and serious. Can this box be sealed under a legal hold, something that prevents any external access until it's been officially transferred to attorneys? I can flag it for legal hold immediately, Carl said. It'll prevent any access requests from being processed without a court order. He paused. I should also tell you, there was a fax that came through this branch 2 weeks ago. Routine looking. Requesting account status verification for a list of dormant accounts. Michael Carter's account was on the list. The records request, Marcus said. Keswick's. I didn't process it, Carl said. It came through and something about the list felt off the accounts were all too specific, too targeted, not the random distribution you'd see in a genuine dormancy sweep. Flagged it for review and it's been sitting in a hold queue. He paused again. Didn't know what it meant at the time. You do now, Lily said. He looked at her. Something in his expression was a mixture of things, the particular emotion of a person who realizes that a small decision they made for vague reasons turned out to matter enormously. Yes, he said, I do now. That flag might be the thing that kept this box intact, Raven said. He looked at Carl with something that in another man might have been called warmth, but in Raven looked more like the steady acknowledgement of one trustworthy person to another. While Marcus continued going through the USB files and Carl began the process of flagging the account for legal hold, Danny stepped to the far side of the room and made a call. Came back 3 minutes later and his expression had shifted. Victor Hayes flew into Phoenix last night, he said. 10 p.m. flight from Las Vegas. He looked at Raven. My contact at the airport has friends who notice things. Victor landed with 2 men. They rented a vehicle. The information landed like a countdown starting. He came himself, Raven said, which means he's scared, Lily said. Or he thinks he needs to supervise. Both, Marcus said without looking up. When people get scared, they stop delegating. He's going to go to the bar first, Danny said. When he finds out she's not there, he'll start looking, Raven said, which gives us a window. He looked at Marcus. How long to package this for the attorneys? Give me 40 minutes to inventory and document what we have. Another 30 for the USB copy, Marcus paused. But Raven, there's something else on this drive. He turned the laptop again. Contact list. People Michael identified as potential witnesses, business owners who had expressed willingness to speak if there was ever a real avenue to do so. 36 names, addresses, phone numbers. Lily looked at the list. The names of 36 people her father had sat with at kitchen tables, listening to their stories, cross-referencing their documents, making them feel that someone was willing to stand beside them when the world had convinced them they were alone. He never stopped working, she said softly. No, Raven said. He didn't. She reached out and touched the edge of the laptop screen, not the names themselves, just the edge of the thing that held them, and she took a breath that was steadier than she felt. These people are going to need to know what's happening, she said. So when the attorneys move, when the evidence goes to federal authorities, these people have been waiting 10 years for someone to tell them it wasn't over. We'll reach them, Raven said. One at a time, the right way. I want to be part of that, Lily said. She looked at him directly. Don't want to be the person who handed this off and walked away. I want to be there when these people find out there's going to be accountability. Raven held her gaze for a moment. I know, he said. You will be. Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Face did the thing again, the thing it did, when a pattern was resolving into something clear and alarming. Victor Hayes just sent a text to a number in my contact monitor, he said. The number belongs to a man named Drew Solis. Solis is a former police contact who has run private investigative work. For as of this morning, I can now confirm Sonoran Shield partners. He looked up. The text says, she's not at the bar. Check the Chandler branch. The room crystallized. Keswick's records request had listed the account. Even without knowing the specific branch, someone smart enough, Victor, who had known Michael personally, who might have known Michael's banking habits, could narrow it down fast. Chandler was a logical conclusion, and now they were inside it. How far is he from here? Raven asked, completely level. He landed last night. He could be anywhere. Danny was already at the door. 20 minutes. Could be 5. Finish the inventory, Raven said to Marcus. Carl flagged that hold right now, not in a few minutes right now. Lily, he looked at her. She was already closing the box. I know, she said, we move. The documents go with Marcus. USB drive copies go to 2 separate locations before the attorneys receive anything. Nothing gets left in one place. He paused. And the second recorder, they all looked at the cloth-wrapped recorder at the bottom of the box. The one Michael had placed here, separately from the one he'd left in the house. The backup. The one that might contain things even the first recording hadn't fully covered. Lily picked it up. She held it for a second. "Dad," she said. "Just that." Just his name, very quietly, not to anyone in the room. Then she put it in her pocket. Carl's hands were moving fast on his keyboard. "Legal hold is flagged," he said. "Account is locked. Any access attempt now generates an immediate alert to the branch manager, me, and to the compliance office." He looked up. "Done." "Good man," Raven said. They moved. Out of the viewing room through the branch to the employee exit. Marcus had the 2 manila envelopes under his arm. Lily had both recorders and the small notebook she'd tucked inside her jacket. The USB drive was in Marcus's shirt pocket. The notebooks and the remaining materials stayed in the box under legal hold in the vault. Danny was outside first. He stood for a moment, reading the street, reading the parking area, reading the particular quality of a space when something wrong is present in it. He turned back. "Clear," he said. "For now." They moved to the vehicles. Marcus and Cole went first. Raven walked with Lily, one hand not quite on her shoulder, but near it, the kind of proximity that said, "I am here, I have you, we are going to be fine." "Raven," she said as they reached the vehicle. "Yeah, thank you," she said it simply, not effusively. The way you say thank you when you mean it so completely that more words would dilute it. He looked at her. "Your father would have done the same for any one of us." "I know," she said. "That's why I came." They got in. The door closed. The vehicle moved. 3 streets away, a rental car with Victor Hayes in the passenger seat was moving toward the Chandler branch, toward a box that was now legally locked and an account that would generate an alert the moment anyone tried to touch it. The girl who was 11 miles of desert and 47 minutes of her father's voice and 36 names in a notebook, and the absolute unshakable conviction that what her father had died protecting was worth everything it had cost. Victor Hayes had spent 10 years thinking he had won. He was about to find out what losing actually looked like. In Raven's vehicle, Lily Carter sat with her father's letter against her chest and his voice in her pocket, and the names of 36 people who had been waiting a decade for exactly this morning. She watched the Chandler streets move past the window, and she did not look back. She had never been someone who looked back. Marcus made the call to the attorneys from the vehicle while they were still moving, not from his regular phone. From a prepaid he'd picked up at a gas station 3 months ago, for reasons he couldn't have articulated at the time, beyond a vague professional instinct that a man in his position should always have one. He believed in instincts. Instincts were just pattern recognition that moved faster than conscious thought, and tonight this morning had been full of patterns resolving into things he wished weren't true. The attorney's name was Sandra Okafor, federal criminal defense and whistleblower cases based in Phoenix, with a practice that had twice taken on cases against financial fraud operations and won both times. Raven had her number from a situation 3 years ago that had nothing to do with this one, and everything to do with the same fundamental principle that some people needed someone willing to stand next to them in a room full of power and not blink. Sandra picked up on the second ring. It was 6:47 in the morning. "I've been expecting a call like this," she said, after Marcus gave her enough context to understand the shape of it. "Not this specific call, but this kind of call." "Can you move today?" Marcus asked. "Describe the evidence package." He described it. All of it, the authenticated contracts, the banking records, the correspondence between Aldous and Stanton, the memorandum of understanding with all 3 signatures, including Whitfield's, the video footage from the title company, the contact list of 36 witnesses, and both recordings. There was a pause on Sandra's end that Marcus read correctly as a lawyer, calculating not whether to take this, but how fast she could move and what she needed first. "Video with Keswick," she said. "Is it time-stamped and authenticated?" "Notarized copies in the package. The original file is on the USB. The memorandum 3 signatures," you said. "Whitfield is currently serving. Commerce Committee." Another pause, shorter. "That escalates federal jurisdiction. We're talking DOJ, not just state AG." She paused a 3rd time. "I need originals in my hands within 6 hours. Can you do that?" 4, Marcus said. "Even better. I'm going to make 2 calls before you arrive." Don't tell me where you are right now, and don't come directly to my office. I'll text you an alternate location." She paused once more. "The people who built this, do they know you have it? They know something is happening. They don't know what we have or where it is. Then the next 4 hours are everything," Sandra said. "Move carefully and move fast." She hung up. Marcus looked at Cole, who was driving. "You heard that?" "I heard it," Cole said. He was already adjusting his route. In Raven's vehicle, Danny was on his own phone. He had spent the last 20 minutes building a different kind of picture, not legal, not evidentiary, but logistical. Victor Hayes had landed with 2 men. The rental vehicle had been tracked by the airport contact to a model and plate. Danny had 3 people looking for it. "They went to the bar first," Danny told Raven. "My guy says a vehicle matching the description drove past Black Canyon around 6:15. Slowed down, didn't stop, kept moving." "They're circling," Raven said, "trying to figure out what they're walking into before they commit to a direction," Danny said. "Which means Victor doesn't know exactly what she has. He knows something moved last night. He doesn't know the scope." Lily was listening to all of this from the back seat. She was holding the cloth-wrapped second recorder in both hands, turning it over slowly, not nervously but deliberately, the way you handle something you haven't yet decided how to use. "I want to play it," she said. Raven looked at her in the mirror. The second recorder. He put it here separately from the one in the house. He wanted them both to survive independently. The one in the house was the message for me, for you to explain. This one, she looked down at it. He wouldn't have duplicated himself. This is something different. "Play it," Raven said. She found the play button. The recorder was older but functional. The battery was dead, but Marcus had produced a universal adapter from his bag with the matter-of-fact preparedness that had come to seem entirely natural in a man who clearly thought through contingencies as a form of breathing. She plugged it in. She pressed play. Static, then silence. Then a sound that made her go very still. The sound of a man settling into a chair, the ambient noise of a room she had never been in, but that she immediately recognized as her father's workshop. She knew the acoustic signature of it from childhood memories. The particular way sound behaved in that space. "This is for the record," Michael Carter's voice said. "Not for Lily, not for the club, for the record. In case anyone ever questions what I knew and when I knew it and what I did about it." Voice was different on this recording. The first recording had been made for her, measured, careful, explanatory. The voice of a father writing a letter. This one was made for evidence. The voice of a man who had stopped being afraid and started being precise. He named names. Not just the names they already knew. He named a 4th person they hadn't encountered yet. A woman named Carolyn Voss, who ran the compliance department at a regional bank and who had, Michael said, processed the loan documents for at least 11 of the 37 businesses while knowing the structure was fraudulent. He had her signature on internal memos. He had a conversation she'd had with Stanton, the lawyer, recorded, without her knowledge at a meeting that Michael had attended under a different pretense entirely. "He was deeper into this than we thought," Danny said softly. "He was a year ahead of all of them," Lily said. There was something in her voice, not pride, exactly. Closer to grief that had found a place to stand. They thought they got to him before he finished. Didn't understand that he was already finished. He was just waiting for the right moment to move. And then he died. Before that moment came, Raven said, "Yes," she paused the recording. "But the moment didn't die with him." She resumed it. "Michael spent 11 minutes on Carolyn Voss, the documentation, the meeting, the recording location, the file name on the USB drive where the audio could be found. Then he moved to something that made everyone in the vehicle go quiet in a different way. There's a man named Drew Solis," Michael's voice said. "Former law enforcement. He's been hired to watch me. I've noticed him 3 times in the last 2 weeks, same vehicle, different locations, too consistent to be coincidence. Don't know yet who he's working for, but I have a partial plate." He read the plate. "I want this on record in case anything happens to me. Drew Solis was watching me in the days before, whatever comes next." Danny pulled out his phone immediately. He read the partial plate against the information his contact had given him about Victor's rental car and the associates. He looked up. It's Solis, same man. Victor brought him. Which meant Victor hadn't just been connected to Solis recently. He'd been using Solis for at least 11 years. He'd been the one running surveillance on Michael in the final weeks. He'd been there. In the peripheral vision of a man who was trying to finish the most important work of his life, Victor Hayes had been watching and reporting. Lily turned the recorder off. She held it in her lap and looked straight ahead and said nothing for about 30 seconds. Then, Victor was there when my father died, not a question. We don't know that, Raven said carefully. He was having him watched, she said. He knew my father was getting close to moving. He would have known the timeline. He had every reason to accelerate things, to make sure my father didn't reach the moment. She paused. That's not a guess. That's a logical conclusion from the evidence. Raven didn't answer, which was an answer. I'm not going to do anything about that right now, she said. Voice was flat and clear and completely controlled. Telling you what I think, because I don't want to be the person who sits on things. But right now, what matters is the evidence. What matters is the box and Sandra Okafor and getting this to people who can do something with it that lasts. She looked at the recorder. Victor doesn't get to end this the same way he ended my father. He doesn't get to make this disappear. Danny looked back at her from the front seat. He had an expression that was hard to name, something between admiration and the particular ache of a man watching someone carry something too heavy and doing it anyway. He's not going to, Danny said. I promise you that. Sandra Okafor's text came through to Marcus at 7:12. An address, a law office belonging to a colleague, not Sandra's own building, with parking around the back. They arrived at 7:31. Sandra was already there with a paralegal and a man she introduced only as James, who had the bearing and the particular quality of attention that suggested federal law enforcement, though Sandra didn't elaborate on his specific capacity, and nobody asked. The evidence transfer took 40 minutes. Sandra and her paralegal processed each item with methodical care, logging, photographing, signing chain of custody documentation that Marcus had thought to bring prepared. Every document, every file, the USB drive with its contents, both recorders. Sandra listened to a selected portion of the second recording and stopped it after 4 minutes with the expression of someone who has just seen a hand that is much stronger than she anticipated. The Voss documentation, she said. That's the piece that opens the bank angle at the federal level. The Whitfield memorandum gives us the political cover piece. Video. She shook her head once. Mr. Carter was a thorough man. Yes, Lily said. Sandra looked at her. They hadn't spoken directly yet beyond introductions, and Sandra was a woman who chose her moments. I want you to understand what happens next. The moment this goes to federal authorities, the people connected to this case are going to know it's moving. They'll have lawyers within the hour. Some of them will try to negotiate. Some will try to discredit the evidence, challenge the chain of custody, the authentication, the sources. They'll try to discredit my father, Lily said. They'll try everything, Sandra said honestly. I want you prepared for that. I've been prepared for it my whole life, Lily said. Just didn't know what I was preparing for. Sandra held her gaze for a moment, then nodded the nod of one capable person to another. Okay, she said. Then let's get to work. James, whose full title turned out to be Special James Carrera of the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, the fact that Sandra revealed with the calm matter-of-factness of someone for whom federal agents at early morning meetings were a professional normality, spent 20 minutes with the documentation, and then made a call from the hallway that lasted 6 minutes. He came back with a different quality of focus. We're opening a formal inquiry, he said. Given the sitting official connection, this goes to the Public Corruption Unit jointly. We'll need full cooperation from everyone who's been involved in gathering this, and we'll need affidavits from every person in this room before end of day. You'll have them, Raven said. Carrera looked at him, taking the measure of him the way law enforcement instinctively takes the measure of people who don't fit their expected profile. Whatever he found in Raven's face, it apparently settled something. There's one thing we need to address immediately, Carrera said. Victor Hayes is currently in Phoenix. He knows something is happening. If he attempts to leave the state, he won't get far, Raven said quietly. Carrera looked at him again, more carefully this time. Mr. Whitmore, I need to be very clear. I mean, he'll be on a watch list the moment you make the appropriate calls, Raven said evenly. Which I assume you're going to do in the next 20 minutes. Beat. Yes, Carrera said. That's exactly what I mean. For Raven, looked at the wall and didn't smile, but his expression carried something that might have been the ghost of one. While the legal machinery began to move, Sandra drafting the initial filing, Carrera making his calls, the paralegal preparing the affidavit templates, Danny received a message that sent a visible current of tension through him, pulled Raven aside, out of Lily's immediate hearing, and they had 30 seconds of quiet, fast conversation. Raven came back and sat down next to Lily. "Victor is moving," he said, low and direct. He went to the credit union. The alert fired when he tried to access the account status at the window. Branch manager, a different branch, not Carl's, refused the request. Victor left. "He knows the box is locked." He paused. "He's going to know very soon that this has gone past the point where he can stop it." "Good," Lily said. "When that happens, desperate people make choices they wouldn't otherwise make." "I know," she said. "But the evidence is in Sandra's hands. The chain of custody is documented. Carrera has already made his first calls. Victor Hayes can't put this back in a box." She looked at Raven. "It's over for him. He just doesn't know it yet." "He's going to know it soon," Danny said from across the room. His phone was in his hand very soon. The call came at 9:41. Not to Raven, not to Danny, not to Marcus or Sandra or anyone in that room. To Lily's cell phone, a number she didn't recognize. Arizona area code. She looked at it for 2 rings, then answered and put it on speaker without being asked, because the room was full of people who needed to hear whatever was on the other end. Lily Carter. The voice was male, mid-50s. The specific register of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. Not aggressive, controlled. The voice of someone who had decided on a strategy and was executing it. "My name is Gregory Aldous." Nobody in the room moved. Carrera's hand went to a recorder on the table, and he pressed record. Sandra nodded at Lily, a single precise nod that meant, "Keep him talking." "I know who you are," Lily said. "Then you know I'm a man who solves problems," Aldous said. "I'm calling because I think we might be able to solve this particular problem together, rather than through a process that's going to be very long, very public, and very hard on everyone involved." A pause. "Including you." "Including me," Lily repeated. "What your father assembled, and I'll acknowledge that he was a capable man, more capable than we initially gave him credit, for what he assembled is going to be challenged at every level. Authentication, sourcing, chain of custody, these things take years. Years during which you'll be called as a witness, deposed repeatedly, examined and cross-examined. The story of your life will be part of the public record." His voice was the particular smoothness of someone who believed that comfort and self-interest were universal languages. "I'm offering an alternative." "What kind of alternative?" Lily said. "Flat. No question mark. A settlement. Private. The parties involved make restitution to the affected business owners, full restitution, fair value, no legal battle required. Exchange, the evidence your father gathered is sealed, not filed. You receive a significant sum personally, enough to build the kind of life a young woman in your position deserves." Everyone moves forward. The room was absolutely silent. Lily looked at Raven. He looked at her. His expression said nothing, and everything it said, "I will support whatever you do." And it said, "I already know what you're going to do." And it said, "Your father would know too." She looked at the phone. "Mr. Aldous," she said. Her voice was very calm. Completely, almost unnaturally calm. "I want to tell you something." "I'm listening." "My father spent 2 years of his life documenting what you did. He drove to 37 kitchen tables and sat with 37 families who had lost something they built with their own hands because you decided their work was worth more to you than it was to them. He was scared I heard it on the recording he left me, but he kept going, kept building the file. He kept protecting the evidence." She paused. "And then he died. And I grew up without him. Grew up being shuffled between relatives and struggling alone, and I spent years being angry at him for leaving me." Another pause, shorter. "I'm not angry at him anymore. I understand now what he was doing, and I understand why it mattered more to him than his own safety. And I want you to understand something, Mr. Aldous." "Yes?" His voice was carefully neutral, but underneath it something had shifted. The smoothness had developed a texture. The texture of a man beginning to understand that the strategy isn't working. "This call is being recorded," Lily said. "You have been speaking for the last 3 minutes to a room that includes an FBI special agent from the Financial Crimes Unit, 2 federal criminal attorneys, and 4 witnesses. The evidence from my father's safe deposit box is already in federal custody. The filing went in 40 minutes ago. A beat. Your settlement offer is now part of the record. Silence on the line, not the strategic kind, the real kind. The silence of a man whose plan has just collapsed under him and who is standing in the rubble trying to understand what happened. You should call your attorney, Mr. Aldous, Lily said. You're going to need one. She ended the call. The room exhaled. Not dramatically, people in this room were too professionally composed for dramatic exhalation. There was a collective release of the particular tension that builds when you're waiting to see if someone will hold. She had held. Carrera was already on his phone, stepping into the hallway, his voice low and rapid. Sandra was typing. The paralegal was flagging the recording. Danny looked at Lily across the room and said very quietly, "Damn." Raven said nothing. He simply looked at her with the expression of a man who has just witnessed something that mattered and knew better than to diminish it with insufficient words. Marcus was already running the next sequence, the witness contact list, the 36 names, divided it into sections, and was coordinating with 2 people by text, former colleagues from his accounting days who had the particular skills for having sensitive conversations with frightened people and making them feel, correctly, that this time was different. This time there was someone standing beside them. The first call went out at 10:15. Tommy Reyes, the mechanic from Mesa, the one Michael had mentioned on the recording, the first person he'd found. The beginning of the whole chain, Tommy Reyes answered on the 3rd ring. He was 63 years old and had spent the last 11 years working for someone else's shop because his own was gone, and he answered the phone with the wariness of a man who had learned that calls from unknown numbers rarely brought anything good. Marcus identified himself, explained briefly, clearly enough, but not too much, said the words that needed to be said. There was a silence on Tommy Reyes's end of the line. Then a sound that Marcus would remember for a long time, not crying exactly, but the sound of a breath being released that had been held for 11 years. The sound of a man who had been told, finally, that it wasn't just him, that he wasn't wrong, that someone had kept going when he couldn't. Michael Carter, Tommy said. His voice was rough. That man kept going even when I told him to stop. Told him it wasn't worth the risk, he said. A pause. Said some things are worth the risk, whether they work out or not. Marcus looked across the room at Lily, who was watching him. Daughter is here, Marcus said into the phone. She's the one who finished it. She's okay? Tommy asked. She's more than okay, Marcus said. Lily heard it from across the room. She turned away and looked at the wall for a moment, and nobody intruded on that moment because everyone in the room understood what it was. The arrests came in 3 waves. Aldous first, his call to Lily had given Carrera the final thread of direct communication he needed to establish consciousness of guilt. The warrant was processed with the speed that reflected both the strength of the evidence package and the involvement of a sitting state official, which had moved this to the top of multiple priority lists simultaneously. Aldous was taken into federal custody at 11:54 a.m. at his Scottsdale office. His assistant, according to the report that reached Mark's phone 40 minutes later, described him as having looked not surprised. Exactly. More like a man who had been waiting for something for a long time and was almost relieved when it arrived. Keswick at 2 in the afternoon. He tried to leave through his back door and was met by 2 agents who had anticipated exactly that. He said nothing. He was a retired judge. He knew better than to talk without a lawyer present, which was professionally sensible and also, given the depth of the evidence against him, entirely futile. Carolyn Voss at 4:15. She had already called an attorney by the time agents arrived. The attorney, Sandra heard later through channels, took one look at the documentation Sandra's office had filed and advised his client to cooperate. State Senator James Whitfield at 6 p.m., which was the one that made the news. It made the news because someone in the building leaked it, not to harm the case, Sandra believed, but because these things tend to leak when they involve sitting officials, and there was no stopping it. By 6:30, 3 local TV stations had the story. By 8, it had crossed regional wire services. By 10 p.m., it was national. Lily found out about the Whitfield arrest the same way most of Arizona did, from a news alert on Marcus's phone, which went off in the middle of a meal that someone had finally thought to produce for the people who had been operating on coffee and adrenaline since 5 in the morning. They were back at the Black Canyon Tavern by then, not because it was the safest or most convenient location, but because it was the one that mattered. She read the alert. She set the phone down on the table. She picked up her fork and continued eating. Danny watched her. "You okay?" "Yes," she said. Then both." He nodded. That was the right answer. Victor Hayes was arrested at 9:17 p.m., attempting to board a flight to Mexico City at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. He had apparently decided, sometime in the middle of the day when the calls stopped coming in and the silence from his associates became too complete to ignore, that the situation was past the point of management. He'd gone to the airport with a bag and a passport and the particular desperation of a man who had spent his life selling out other people and had finally run out of people to sell. He was identified at the gate by two agents who had been there since 4 p.m. on the watch list that Carrera had established that morning. He didn't run. There was nowhere to run to. He sat down in a chair at the gate and put his hands on his knees and stared at the floor. One of the agents later described him as looking less like a man being arrested and more like a man sitting down after carrying something heavy for a very long time. The word reached Raven at 9:40. He came and found Lily, who was in the garage behind the tavern where someone had been showing her how a particular engine component worked, conversation that had started because she'd asked a question and because the man answering's a 20-year veteran named Pete had discovered that she listened with her father's quality of attention, the kind that made you want to keep talking. Raven stood in the doorway. She looked at him, and she knew from his face before he said anything. "Victor," she said. "Apprehended at the airport," he said. "He's in federal custody." Pete, reading the room, excused himself quietly and pulled the garage door mostly closed behind him, leaving them alone. Lily set down the part she'd been holding. She stood for a moment doing nothing in particular, which was the thing you do when something you've been driving toward for months or years or your whole life finally arrives and you're not sure what shape you're going to be in on the other side of it. "It's not going to bring him back," she said. "No," Raven said. "Won't. I know that. I've known that the whole time. Was never what this was about." She paused. I think what it's about is that my father believed some things were worth the cost. He believed the truth was worth it. He believed those 37 families were worth it. And he was right, and he died before he could see that he was right. And she stopped, started again. I just needed him to be right. I needed there to be a world where doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, eventually means something. Raven walked into the garage and stood near her. Not close enough to impose, close enough to be present. "He was right," Raven said simply. She looked at him. "Yeah," she said, "he was." She picked the engine component back up and looked at it. "Pete was showing me how the timing works on this." Raven looked at the component. "You're interested in the mechanical side." "My father was a mechanic," she said. "I grew up watching him. I thought it was just something he did. I think it might be something I know how to do." She turned the component over in her hands. "Don't have anywhere to go from here. I should say that plainly. I'm 18. I have $42 in a bank account, and everything I brought with me is in a bag in a room at the back of this bar." "I know," Raven said. "I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "I know that too." He paused. "But I'm going to offer something anyway, because your father asked me to take care of you, and because you've earned it 6 times over. There's a room at the back of the bar that nobody uses. There's a garage with 3 bikes that need work. And there's a community that has been watching you since you walked through that door last night and has collectively decided that you are exactly who you appear to be." He met her eyes, "Which means you already belong here, if you want to." She looked at him for a long time. "The families," she said, "the 36 on the list. What happens to them now?" "Sandra says the restitution process will be part of the legal settlement. It'll take time, but it'll happen. The federal case makes it non-negotiable. I want to help with that," she said. "The outreach, making sure they know, making sure they're not just receiving a check someday and wondering what it means. I want them to know what my father built, what he tried to do for them." "Can do that from here," Raven said. "Take as long as it takes." She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. Then okay. She put the component down on the workbench and looked at the garage, at the tools organized along the wall, at the 3 bikes in various states of disassembly, the fluorescent light overhead, and the smell of oil and metal that was the smell of her earliest memories, the smell of her father's workshop. He said you'd be here, she said. He said, if I brought the chain and the vest, you'd be waiting. Thought. I don't know what I thought, that it would be more complicated, that I'd have to convince you. You didn't have to convince anyone, Raven said. You just had to show up. That's the hardest part sometimes, she said. Yeah, he said. It is. She picked up a wrench from the workbench. She held it with the instinctive, unpracticed correctness of someone who had grown up watching the right grip and absorbed it without knowing she was learning. She looked at the nearest motorcycle. Pete left off at the timing, she said. I'll get Pete, Raven said. He walked to the door and called for Pete, and Pete came back in without ceremony and picked up where he'd left off. Lily Carter stood in a garage that smelled like her father's memory and listened and asked questions and turned the wrench over in her hands. Outside the bar slowly filled back up with the sound of people who had come through something together and were on the other side of it, now changed by it in ways they would spend years understanding. 3 months later, the first restitution payment went to Tommy Reyes. Called Lily when it cleared. She was in the garage when her phone rang, actually covered in grease for the first time, because Pete had graduated her from watching to doing, and she answered with her shoulder because her hands weren't clean. Came, Tommy said. His voice was thick, with something she recognized, the particular emotion of receiving something they'd stopped believing would ever come. The full amount, with interest. 11 years of interest. I know, she said. Sandra called me this morning. I want you to know. He stopped. Started again. I want you to know that your father came to my house when nobody else would. He sat at my table and he listened, and he said, Tommy, I'm going to make this right. I told him it was too big. Told him he couldn't. A pause. He just looked at me and said, maybe not, but I'm going to try. Lily pressed her lips together, breathed through her nose. He did, she said. He did, Tommy said. So did you. 6 months after the night Lily walked through the door of the Black Canyon Tavern, Gregory Aldous pled guilty to 17 federal counts, including wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Ronald Keswick pled guilty to 12 counts. Carolyn Voss cooperated with the prosecution and received a reduced sentence. State Senator James Whitfield resigned his seat before the indictment was formally filed and was convicted 8 months later on federal corruption charges. He received 7 years. Victor Hayes went to trial. He had a lawyer who made the expected arguments, challenging evidence, questioning chain of custody, attempting to discredit a dead man's recordings on technical grounds that Sandra Okafor dismantled one by one with the patient precision of someone who had anticipated every move before it was made. It took 11 days. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Lily was in the courthouse when the verdict came in. She sat in the gallery and heard the word and felt not joy exactly, not triumph. Something quieter and more permanent. The sensation of a door closing on something that had been opened too long, letting in cold air for a decade, and now finally closed. She looked at the vest that she'd carried in her bag that day, not to the courthouse. She didn't bring it inside, but she touched it that morning, held it for a moment in the parking structure the way she'd touched it every significant morning since April. And she'd said the same words she said to the recorder on the morning the filing went in. Dad, just that. She didn't need more words. He would have understood. Year to the day after, she walked into Black Canyon Tavern with a chain dragging behind her. She was in the garage working on a bike that she had rebuilt from the frame up her bike, the one Raven had quietly arranged to arrive in pieces 3 months after she moved in, the one Pete had helped her plan, and that she had assembled with her own hands over the course of 4 months, learning every system the way her father had learned, every system, by feel and by attention, and by the particular patience of someone who understands that things worth doing take time. The name on the registration was hers, Lily M. Carter. She rolled it out of the garage on a Saturday morning when the air was the particular clarity of an Arizona spring day before the heat set in, when the light was clean and low and everything cast a long shadow. Raven was there, Danny was there, Marcus, Pete, Carl Myers from the credit union, who had quietly become part of the extended circle in the way that people become part of things when they've done the right thing at the right moment and the people around them remember it. Sandra Okafor was there, because she'd been to the bar 3 times now for reasons that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with finding a community that felt real. Even Tommy Reyes was there, drove up from Mesa in his truck, the first time he'd been back to this part of Phoenix in years, because Lily had called him and said she'd be riding for the first time and she wanted him to see it. She started the engine. That sound. The particular sound of an engine that was assembled correctly, that was running clean, that was doing what it was built to do. Father's daughter heard it and felt it in her hands and her chest and somewhere below that, in the place where things live that are too real for words. She looked at Raven. He was looking back at her with an expression that was everything grief and pride and the particular fullness of a man who has kept a promise made to someone who can no longer see it kept, but would have known somehow that it was ready, he said. She thought about that, about what it meant, about the girl who had walked 11 miles through the desert with a chain in her bleeding hands because she had nowhere else to go and had enough of her father in her to go towards something instead of away from it. About the good girl who sat on the floor of a motel room in Casa Grande listening to her father's voice on a recorder for the 14th time and pulled herself up and kept driving. Had. About the 8-year-old pulled from class by a principal with a terrible expression and the 18-year-old who walked through a door that an 8-year-old could never have opened, and the woman she was becoming on the other side. She thought about her father sitting somewhere quiet with a recorder in his hand, scared and methodical, building the best protection he could for the truth and the daughter he was going to have to leave. She thought about him putting her name on an account authorization in handwriting she'd recognize anywhere. She thought about 36 families and 37 kitchen tables and Tommy Reyes's voice on the phone saying it came. She thought about the chain on the floor of the Black Canyon Tavern, the sound it made, the silence that followed it, Raven standing up. She looked at the road ahead. Ready, she said, and Lily Carter rode. She rode for the father who raised her to be exactly this. She rode for the 37 families who got their lives back. She rode for every person who had been told that the truth was too expensive to tell and had believed it, and for everyone who hadn't believed it and paid the price for refusing to. She rode because Michael Carter had been right, and because being right had cost him everything, and because his daughter had died a long time ago, maybe at 8 years old, being pulled out of class, maybe at 18 in a desert motel, maybe on the floor of her childhood bedroom, holding a lockbox key, that rightness was worth the cost. Always was. It always would be. That was the thing her father had tried to protect. Not the evidence, not the file, not the recordings or the documents or the USB drive, with its 11 years of carefully assembled truth. The belief. The belief that some things matter enough to be worth everything. That a man can sit in a room with a recorder and be scared and keep talking. That a daughter can walk 11 miles through the desert and walk through a door into a room full of strangers and say, "My father told me you would be here." Be right. The road opened in front of her, long and clean and entirely hers. Michael Carter had started something he never got to finish. His daughter finished it, and then she kept going. The further she rode, the lighter something became inside her chest, not disappearing, but settling the way you settle when they finally find the place they belong. The wind was the kind of thing you couldn't describe to someone who hadn't felt it, moving at that speed on that kind of morning, on a machine you built with your own hands. It was physical, and it was something else at the same time. Something that didn't have a name in any language she knew. She rode for about 40 minutes before she pulled off onto a side road and stopped. She sat there for a moment with the engine idling beneath her, looking out at the flat reach of the Arizona landscape, the particular stillness of it, the way the light sat on everything at that hour like it was taking its time. She reached into her jacket pocket, the recorder. The first one, her father's voice, 47 minutes, the one she'd listened to 14 times in a motel room in Casa Grande and 100 times since. She didn't play it. She just held it in her palm, the way she'd held it on the morning the filing went in, the way she'd held it on the morning of the verdict. "I finished it," she said. Her voice was quiet. There was no one around to hear it. Desert doesn't answer when you talk to it, which is one of the things she had come to appreciate about it. It holds what you say without doing anything with it. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. "Finished it," she said again, "and I'm okay. I want you to know that." I'm actually okay. She held the recorder a moment longer. Then she put it back in her pocket, next to her chest, next to the letter he'd written her that nobody else had ever read and nobody else ever would. She sat with it for a little while. A hawk crossed the sky above her, unhurried, riding a thermal the way living things ride what the world offers them, not fighting it, not surrendering to it, just using it, moving forward, staying aloft. She watched it until it was gone. Then she turned the throttle. The engine responded the way she'd taught it to, the way she'd learned to ask it to, clean and immediate and full of its own particular power. She pulled back onto the road. She pointed the front wheel toward the horizon. She didn't look back. She never had been someone who looked back. Behind her, the Black Canyon Tavern sat on the edge of the desert, the way it had always sat, like a fist raised against the sky, like a place that had decided to mean something and kept that decision for 40 years. Inside it, on the wall behind the bar, was the memorial that hadn't been there a year ago. Michael Carter's name was on it, alongside others who had been forgotten and were no longer. Beside the memorial, hung flat and careful, was a vest, not his original vest, which Lily kept, but a new one, made by the same hands that had made his with the same care. A reminder, a presence. And in the garage, out back, a workbench had been cleared and organized the way her father organized his tools, in order, by function and size, the way you do it when you take the work seriously. When you understand that caring for your tools is a form of respect for everything you'll do with them. Her name was on the bench, not official, just written in marker on a piece of tape, the way you mark what's yours in a place full of people who share space and understand what sharing space means. Lily, that was enough. She was enough. She had always been enough. She just hadn't had anyone to show her that until she walked through the right door at the right moment, carrying the right thing, bleeding from her hands and running, on 3 days of bad sleep, and the particular kind of courage that isn't about not being afraid, but about not being afraid and going anyway, because your father raised you to understand the difference. The road ahead of her was long and open and entirely hers. She rode into it without hesitation. The daughter of Michael Carter, mechanic, truth teller, the man who sat at 37 kitchen tables and listened and said, "I'm going to try," rode into the Arizona morning, like she had always been exactly this. Like the desert had been waiting for her specifically, like the road had her name on it. It did, she always would.